You wake up, the room is quiet,
Right.
the ceiling is just, a blank white canvas. But before you've even moved a single muscle, before you have even fully opened your eyes, the voice just starts.
Oh, yeah. Instantly.
Right. It's like, what time is it? I have that meeting at 10. Did I send that email yesterday? I definitely should have sent that email. Wait, did I say something weird at dinner last night? My throat feels a little scratchy. Am I getting sick?
It is, it's entirely relentless.
Yeah.
And it happens completely automatically.
It does. And we just accept it. We wake up and immediately this narrator clocks in for its shift, right? And it just starts generating this dense, nonstop commentary about our lives.
Yeah, constant stream of self-reference.
Exactly. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. It is Sunday, May 10th, 2026. And the stack of sources we are pouring over today is, it's going to fundamentally challenge how you experience that exact voice in your head.
It really is a paradigm shift.
It's massive. Our mission today is to look at this totally fascinating intersection of modern neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and surprisingly, ancient theology.
Yeah, which is not a combination you usually see.
Not at all. But we're going to deconstruct this modern obsession we all seem to have with achieving, quote unquote, higher consciousness. We're going to explore why your sense of self, that very voice we just described, is actually just a neurological survival interface.
Right, a tool, not the truth.
Yes. And maybe most incredibly, we're going to unpack the structural, the mechanical reasons why profound moments of inspiration, whether you're a painter, a scientist, or a mystic, why they almost always feel like a literal download from an outside source.
Yeah, the sensation of foreign thought. I think it's important to lay down a bit of a framework right at the top here, though.
Oh, for sure.
Because the stack of research we're examining today, it touches on deeply religious and philosophical concepts. We're looking at clinical studies on the brain during mystical states, research on psychedelics, and even ancient concepts like Christ consciousness.
Heady stuff.
Very heavy. But I want to be super clear for everyone listening. Our goal today isn't to validate or, endorse any specific theological doctrine or any political viewpoint, for that matter.
Right. We're not taking sides on the theology here.
Exactly. We are strictly looking at the structural reality of the human brain. We are trying to understand the mechanics of meaning, impartially.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the magnitude of what these papers are suggesting, we have to acknowledge the water we are all swimming in right now.
The modern baseline assumption.
Yeah. In modern 21st century culture, we operate on this massive unspoken assumption about the mind. We tend to believe that human beings are the pinnacle of existence, specifically because of our intense self-awareness.
Right. I think, therefore I am. We've doubled down on that.
Totally. The cultural messaging we get from self-help books to corporate leadership seminars is basically more self-narration, more identity building, and more hyper-analysis of your own feelings equals a higher state of being. We equate being deeply entrenched in our own internal monologue with being evolved.
Yeah, the baseline assumption of modern life is that consciousness is a matter of self-intensity. Like, the more you there is, the better you're doing.
Exactly.
But what the neuroscientific data in our sources reveals is, well, it's a complete contradiction of that idea.
Which blew my mind.
Right. Because we have this naive view that the brain is like a video camera. We think it's just passively receiving objective reality and playing it back for us on a little screen in our heads.
Like we're just watching a movie of the world.
Exactly. But the brain doesn't receive reality. It models it, it predicts, it filters, it actively constructs an organized simulation of the world so that the organism can survive.
It's building a useful illusion.
Yes, a highly adaptive one. And the heavy lifting for this construction, particularly the construction of the self, is done by a specific network of interacting brain regions. It's called the default mode network.
The DMN. If there's a main character in today's deep dive, this network is it.
Without a doubt. So if you look at a major 2023 review in our stack, it describes the default mode network as the neurological system primarily responsible for self-reference, autobiographical memory, language processing, and social cognition.
So it's basically the hardware that runs the me software.
That's a great way to put it. It is the physical architecture of your internal narrative. And what's interesting is how it operates. When you are focused on a very specific, demanding task, like doing a complex math problem or dodging traffic on a bicycle, the DMN actually quiets down.
Because you can't afford to be daydreaming in traffic.
Right. But the second your mind wanders, the second you start daydreaming about your upcoming vacation or, replaying a conversation from 3 years ago where you wish you had delivered a better comeback,
Oh man, I do that all the time.
we all do.
Yeah.
And that right there, that is the default mode network roaring back to life.
So it's the part of the brain that generates the feeling of me. It's the mechanism that strings together a past me and a future me to create this continuous story.
Precisely. And we shouldn't demonize it. I mean, it is an evolutionary marvel.
Right, we need it.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Without the default mode network, you couldn't plan for the future. You couldn't maintain long-term relationships because you wouldn't be able to map social hierarchies or remember your shared history with another person.
You wouldn't know who your friends are.
Exactly. But the critical scientific insight here, the one that really shifts paradigms in these papers, is that this network is a biological survival interface. It is a tool. It is not, it's not a magical window into the ultimate objective truth of the universe.
Yeah, I was trying to conceptualize this while reading through the papers, and I kept thinking about how we completely misunderstand our relationship to our own minds.
House.
Well, we walk around thinking we are the engine of the car. We think that the conscious voice in our head is the pistons firing, right?
Yeah.
The actual mechanical force that is driving the vehicle of our lives.
The prime mover.
Right. But if you look at the neuroscience, the self we experience isn't the engine at all. It's just the dashboard interface.
Oh, that's good.
It's the speedometer. It's the check engine light. And we spend our entire lives confusing the blinking light on the dashboard with the engine itself.
What's fascinating here is that I think that captures the dynamic beautifully.
Mm.
But we can even push that analogy further, especially based on Thomas Metzinger's work.
Okay, yeah, Metzinger's name came up a lot in the stack.
He's foundational here. His self-model theory is heavily referenced throughout these papers. He argues that the self is not a physical thing you can find inside the universe.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning, if a neurosurgeon opens up your skull, they aren't going to find a tiny version of you,
Yeah.
a little homunculus sitting in a control room pulling levers.
Right, there's no little me in there.
Right. What actually exists is what Metzinger calls a phenomenal self-model.
Phenomenal meaning. It appears as a phenomenon, like it just feels real.
Exactly. It is a model generated by the brain that is transparent to the user.
Transparent.
Yeah, think about when you wear a virtual reality headset. If the software is good enough, you forget you are wearing a screen strapped to your face, right?
Yeah, you just totally buy into the digital world.
You experience it as reality. The brain self-model is the ultimate VR headset. It generates an avatar, a working model of you to stabilize your sensory experience and help you navigate incredibly complex social structures.
Wow.
But the system is so efficient that it hides its own rendering process from you. You don't feel like a brain generating a model. You just feel like you looking out at the world.
So it's an avatar we use to play the video game of life. But wait, if the self doesn't physically exist, what am I actually looking at when I turn my attention inward? Like when I sit quietly and observe my thoughts, it certainly feels like I'm observing a concrete entity.
You're observing a process, not an entity.
You're a process.
Yes. And the fact that it feels like a concrete entity is just proof that the survival software is working perfectly. If you didn't firmly believe in the reality of your own self-model, you wouldn't fight so hard to keep it alive, right? You wouldn't feed it, protect it, or care about its social status.
That makes a lot of sense. It has to feel real for us to survive.
Exactly. And we also need to recognize that this isn't a uniquely human phenomenon. The sources point out that consciousness is a biological spectrum.
Oh, right, the animal studies.
Yeah. Animals possess forms of self-awareness, emotional memory, and problem-solving capabilities. A dog has a spatial self-model to navigate a room without bumping into walls, and a social self-model to understand its place in a pack.
But humans have just, supercharged that system with language.
Exactly. Language allows us to build a temporal self-model. We can project our avatar far into the future and deep into the past.
We can worry about a mortgage payment 20 years from now.
Precisely. Consciousness isn't some magical dividing line where humans suddenly crossed over into divine, objective awareness. It is an evolutionary modeling capacity that we have pushed to an absolute extreme.
Which brings us to the inevitable problem. Because if our self, this constant, chatty narrator generated by the DMN, is just a functional dashboard, a tool designed to help the organism survive, what happens when the organism becomes totally obsessed with staring at the dashboard?
That's the danger.
Right. If I'm driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour, but I refuse to look out the windshield because I am entirely captivated by the glowing dials and the GPS screen inside the car, What happens?
Well, eventually you crash.
Yeah.
And psychologically speaking, our sources argue that this is exactly what is happening to modern populations on a massive scale.
This is the part of the research that really hit home for me. There's a paper in the stack titled The Mirage of the Recursive Self, and it thoroughly breaks down the dangers of this hyper self-consciousness.
It is a brilliant, albeit somewhat sobering, piece of research. It highlights a fundamental flaw in how we approach mental health and well-being today.
How so?
Well, we generally assume that being hyper-aware of the self makes us deep or grounded or enlightened. We encourage constant self-reflection.
Right. Journaling, analyzing every interaction.
Yes. But clinically, when the default mode network becomes hyperactive and the brain focuses too intensely on its own self-model, it actually leads to paralysis. It correlates strongly with anxiety, narcissism, dissociation, and depression.
Because you just get trapped in a loop.
Yes. Think about what many psychological disorders actually look like in practice. Shame spirals, trauma rumination, obsessive social monitoring, severe social anxiety. All of these involve consciousness becoming completely trapped around the self-model.
It's the brain just hyper-focusing on the avatar.
Exactly. The DMN runs endless simulations of social failure or replays painful memories on a loop, trying to solve a threat to the avatar.
It's the recursive loop. The mind gets locked into me, my pain, my image, my story, my career, my fear, my status, and it just feeds on itself.
And when you are locked in that recursive loop, you become deeply alienated from direct experience.
You're completely disconnected.
You're no longer experiencing life. You're experiencing your own narration about life. You are consuming the story instead of the reality.
Yeah.
The windshield is totally obscured by the glare of the dashboard.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this makes so much sense of a frustration I've had lately, and I really want to push back on a trend we see constantly right now.
Oh, the spiritual trend.
Yeah, this massive wave of pop spirituality out there. You open up social media or you go to certain wellness retreats, and everyone is using these grand terms.
Right.
They talk about achieving higher consciousness or Christ consciousness or, vibrational ascension. But when you listen to the actual substance of what they are talking about, it doesn't sound like liberation at all. It sounds like they just want to spiritualize their ego.
How do you mean? Break that down.
I mean, they aren't talking about stepping away from the narrator. They are just giving the narrator a better script. They imagine a more radiant, cosmic, powerful, special self. They talk about manifesting wealth or curating the perfect aesthetic of peace or vibrating at a frequency that makes them untouchable. It's like they don't want to look out the windshield either. They just want their dashboard to be made of solid gold and encrusted with diamonds. It's still entirely self-referential.
That is a very sharp critique, and it perfectly aligns with the ultimate paradox highlighted in these academic papers. Oh yeah, pop spirituality often takes the standard DMN-driven ego and simply inflates it while wearing sacred, mystical language. But structurally, neurologically, and theologically, higher consciousness is a terrible misnomer.
A misnomer.
Yes, the highest spiritual state documented across human history is not more ordinary consciousness. It is not a supercharged, diamond-encrusted ego.
It's the exact opposite.
It is the absolute opposite. The highest state is freedom from the false center that ordinary consciousness creates.
Freedom from the avatar.
Exactly. The egoic self, the narrator, is incredibly useful as a servant. As we said, it helps you remember your address, pay your taxes, and navigate a crowded room. But it is disastrous as a ruler. When the self-model claims final absolute authority over your reality, it becomes a veil. It blocks you from experiencing the world without the exhausting filter of fear, possession, and control.
Okay, so let's trace this logic. Because if the ego is a dashboard, and obsessing over the dashboard causes anxiety and separates us from reality, then true spiritual liberation isn't about inflating that ego, it's about getting past it.
Right.
But what does that actually look like in the physical brain? I mean, if liberation isn't just thinking better thoughts, what happens when you finally force yourself to look away from the dashboard?
This brings us to a really beautiful intersection in the sources.
Yeah, this is where an ancient theological concept is suddenly being corroborated by modern fMRI machines.
We're diving into the concept of kenosis, and what the sources call the theology and neuroscience of subtraction.
Let's start with the theological roots of that term, because I think the historical context frames the brain science perfectly. The sources dig deeply into the Christian text of Philippians chapter 2.
Yes. The term kenosis comes from ancient Greek, and in Christian theology, it specifically references the conceptual pattern where Christ empties himself.
Empties himself.
Right. Now, the scholarly discussion cited in our sources analyze this text to define kenosis not as an egoic expansion, not as a conquering force, but as self-emptying, radical humility, and voluntary self-limitation.
It's the ultimate letting go.
It is. The foundational pattern is not my will. It is the deliberate removal of the false center. It is the absolute abandonment of the self-model as the ultimate ruling authority of reality.
And for thousands of years, this was purely a theological, philosophical, or spiritual idea. It was something mystics talked about in monasteries.
A matter of faith and practice.
Exactly. But now, in the 21st century, we have the technology to put highly experienced contemplative practitioners into brain scanners and watch what happens in real time.
And the data is astonishingly consistent.
It's incredible.
One of the landmark pieces of research in our stack is a study conducted by Dr. Judson Brewer. His team took experienced meditators, people with tens of thousands of hours of practice, put them in functional magnetic resonance imaging machines, and asked them to enter various meditative states.
How do you even measure a monk's brain doing nothing?
Well, that's the beauty of fMRI. It measures blood flow, which correlates with neural activity.
Huh.
What Brewer's team found was that in these experienced practitioners, the default mode network, specifically regions like the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex, which are the hubs of autobiographical memory and self-referential thought, those regions showed significantly decreased activity.
They literally quieted down, the blood flow dropped, the physical machinery generating the me just took a break.
Exactly. When they enter a state of deep, non-dual awareness, the part of the brain that generates the constant narration dims. And what is perhaps even more fascinating is that this identical structural modulation is now being seen in clinical psychedelic research.
The Johns Hopkins and Imperial College London studies.
Yes. Studies monitoring the brain during psychedelic therapies, specifically during experiences categorized as ego dissolution or ego death, show that the DMN modulates heavily.
The boundaries just melt away.
The ordinary rigid sense of being a separate, isolated I temporarily dissolves. The boundaries of the self-model become permeable. People in these states report that the line between themselves and the universe softens or vanishes entirely.
Okay, I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate for you listening, because every time this topic comes up, the exact same fear surfaces.
I think I know what you're going to ask.
I mean, if the goal is self-emptying, if the pinnacle of human development is to quiet the DMN and dissolve the ego, isn't the goal just to become a zombie?
A zombie.
Yeah. Like, if we completely empty the self, do we just become unconscious, numb, passive beings floating around without a personality? I mean, I don't want to lose my personality.
That is the most common, deeply ingrained modern fear about this entire domain of study.
It's scary.
It is, because the ego fears its own absence. But it fundamentally misunderstands what is actually happening in the brain. Quieting the DMN is not the destruction of awareness. It is not inducing a blank vegetative mind.
Okay.
It is simply the end of egoic possession.
Egoic possession. That's a heavy phrase. What does that mean in practical, everyday terms?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it means the human being becomes less obstructed by the compulsive narrator.
Give me an example.
Think about what happens when you are engaged in a state of absolute flow. Let's say you are playing a musical instrument or rock climbing or writing a piece of code, and you were entirely absorbed in the task.
Oh, yeah. You lose track of time.
You lose track of time, but more importantly, you lose track of yourself. You aren't thinking, look at me, I'm rock climbing so well. I wonder if anyone is watching me climb.
If you think that, you slip and fall.
Exactly. The self-referential thought vanishes, but your awareness is incredibly sharp. Your reactions are lightning fast. You are fully alive.
So the awareness doesn't disappear.
Not at all. The claim of these sources is not that awareness disappears during kenosis or ego dissolution. The claim is that self-reference stops dominating the awareness. You are not less alive. You are actually more directly engaged with reality.
Because you aren't filtering every single microsecond through the exhausting lens of how does this affect me and what does this say about my status?
Precisely.
So you still know your name, you still know your friends, you still have your memories, you just aren't obsessing over whether your friends think your new shoes are cool or agonizing over an awkward thing you said yesterday.
Right.
The dashboard is still there, you're just finally looking out the windshield.
To put it simply, yes. The narrative self stops ruling the system. It becomes a tool again, rather than a tyrant. And what emerges across all these disparate disciplines is what the text refers to as the logos.
The underlying structural pattern of reality.
Exactly. In Christian theology, the pattern is called kenosis. In clinical psychology, it is termed ego dissolution. In Zen Buddhism, it was referred to as non-attachment or no self. In cognitive neuroscience, it is measured as the downregulation of the default mode network.
Is all the same thing.
These are completely different vocabularies, developed centuries apart in radically different cultural contexts, pointing in the exact same structural direction.
Different vocabularies, exact same structural direction. I love how clarifying that is. So let's keep following this chain of events.
Okay.
If you successfully quiet the DMN, if the narrator in your head takes a coffee break and steps back from the microphone, people in these altered states often report having massive, sudden, life-changing insights.
Profound revelations, yes.
We see this in deep meditation, during profound grief, in intense flow states, and certainly with psychedelics. People have these huge aha moments that reshape their entire worldview. But here is the massive question.
The origin of the thought.
Yes. If you, the conscious ego, aren't actively thinking those thoughts, where do they come from?
That is one of the most profound mysteries in cognitive science.
Yeah.
And it is the subject of the paper in our stack titled The Witness That Wasn't There.
It explores the mechanics of inspiration, revelation, and the sensation of what psychologists call foreign thought.
Right. Because we have to ask, why do artists, inventors, or mystics constantly feel like their best ideas are downloaded or revealed to them by an external force?
I mean, the ancient Greeks literally believed that genius was an external spirit that visited you. People today still use phrases like, it just came to me out of nowhere, or something spoke through me.
And to understand why it feels that way, we have to look closely at the ego's primary function. As we establish, its function is not to be the engine, its function is authorship.
Authorship.
Yes. The ego maintains the continuity of the organism by constantly asserting ownership over experience. It says, I thought this, I caused this, I felt this. It is a witnessing structure. It watches your brain process information and then slaps its own copyright label on the final product.
So what does this all mean? When I was reading this part of the source material, the analogy in the text about the factory was helpful, but it felt a little industrial. I started thinking about it more like a ghostwriter, or maybe an algorithm.
I like that. Walk us through how you see it.
Okay, normally your conscious ego is like an insecure celebrity who claims they write all their own books.
Yeah, I follow.
The ego watches the brain subsystems, the raw materials of memory, emotional pattern recognition, sensory data. It watches them do all the actual hard work of putting a thought together. And because the ego was present in the room, watching the thought get constructed step by step, it confidently steps up to the microphone and says, I wrote this. This is my brilliant idea.
It claims authorship because it witnessed the assembly.
Exactly. But what happens when the default mode network goes offline? What happens during a deep flow state or a meditative state or a psychedelic experience? The celebrity leaves the room, the ego takes a nap.
But the brain doesn't stop.
Right. The brain's massive parallel processing systems don't stop working. They keep writing. They synthesize years of trauma or solve a complex math equation or generate a profound philosophical realization, all in the dark, entirely subconsciously.
The unconscious processing continues unimpeded.
Yes. Then, suddenly, the altered state ends. The ego walks back into the room, looks down at the desk, and sees this fully finished, beautifully bound, incredibly complex manuscript just sitting there, a massive psychological insight.
A completed thought.
Yeah. But because the ego was asleep, because it didn't witness the ghostwriters actually doing the work, it looks at the manuscript and says, well, I didn't write this. I didn't watch it get built. It must have come from God. It must have come from the universe. It was downloaded into me.
That is an excellent way to visualize the discontinuity.
Yeah.
And neuroscientifically, it's highly accurate.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. We know that language processing, emotional pattern recognition, and memory synthesis happen in the brain long before conscious awareness catches up.
How much longer?
Well, there are famous experiments in neuroscience demonstrating that the brain initiates action potentials for decisions milliseconds, sometimes even seconds, before the subject consciously decides to act.
That is both terrifying and amazing. It implies we are always playing catch-up with our own biology.
We are. The human mind is vastly larger and vastly more capable than the tiny story it tells about itself. The ego is often just the last part of the cognitive system to find out what the brain and body have already figured out. So when the narrative self returns online after an altered state, whether you just woke up from a vivid dream or you're coming out of an intense 3-hour painting session, It encounters the insight not as a participant who built it, but as an observer discovering it.
Because it missed the whole process.
Yes, because the witnessing chain was broken, the ego interprets the thought as other. It feels alien. It feels transcendent.
Because the ego can only claim ownership over what it witnesses itself constructing. If it didn't see the construction, it assumes a foreign origin.
Exactly. But this leads to a very precarious psychological moment.
Oh, right. The warning in the text.
Yes. The sources issue a severe warning here about what happens in the aftermath of these experiences. They call it the danger of integration.
The narcissism trap.
Because the ego, structurally, is terrified of discontinuity. Discontinuity implies that the ego isn't necessary, which feels like a threat to its very existence.
It feels like death to the ego.
Exactly. So when it returns and encounters this massive, non-egoic insight, it usually panics and tries to quickly possess it. It attempts to categorize the infinite and claim ownership over the experience to reestablish its dominance.
So instead of being humbled by the vastness of the mind, the ego weaponizes the experience.
Precisely. The ego returns from the mystical experience or the psychedelic trip and says, I have been given the secret truth of the universe. I am enlightened. I am a chosen vessel.
Oof. We've all met that guy.
Right. It takes an experience that was fundamentally about self-emptying and twists it into the ultimate badge of self-inflation. The spiritual narcissist is born.
That is such a huge trap.
It is. The sources argue that true integration requires immense active humility. It requires allowing the realization to reshape your behavior without turning the experience into a trophy for your ego to display.
Okay, so let's say you manage to avoid the narcissism trap. The brain is processing these massive, unwitnessed, overwhelming insights in the dark. But when the lights come back on, and the conscious mind encounters this raw, infinite, terrifyingly large realization, how does it avoid completely short-circuiting?
That's the challenge of the interface.
I mean, if you encounter a truth that is simply too big, too complex, or too raw for your normal everyday narrative framework to handle, how do you actually process it without losing your mind?
It builds an interface. It translates the raw data into something comprehensible.
Which brings us to the visual, cultural, and perhaps most controversial aspect of today's deep dive. We are looking at the concept of subjective iconography, or what the papers call the psychological GUI.
Yes, this specific paper deals with how the human brain visually and symbolically renders overwhelming meaning. How do we give shape to the formless?
The sources ask a really provocative question to set this up. They ask, why is it that European Christians traditionally paint a white European-looking Jesus?
Right.
Why do Ethiopian Christians paint an African Jesus? Why do Buddhists see the Buddha during their mystical experiences, while someone from an indigenous South American culture might encounter a jaguar spirit?
It's a universal phenomenon with localized expressions.
Yeah, and in modern cynical culture, we almost exclusively write this off as historical fraud or political propaganda or simple ignorance. We say, oh, they just painted their own faces onto God to secure power.
And we must acknowledge that power, politics, and imperialism absolutely shape religious art and institutional dogma. That is historical fact.
Of course.
However, the sources argue that stopping at the political explanation is entirely incomplete. It misses the deeper cognitive reality.
Which is?
The brain is continuously engaged in the act of translating overwhelming abstract reality into emotionally manageable symbolic representations.
But I'm sure listeners are wondering, how does the brain actually do that translation? If I am a unified person, how is one part of my brain hiding a translation from another part of my brain?
This raises an important question. And to understand this, we have to undergo a massive shift in how we view ourselves.
Okay, I'm ready.
We have to recognize that the mind is not a single unified voice. We experience ourselves as a single I, but internally, neurologically, we are a composite.
A composite, like a team.
Yes. We are composed of multiple, interacting, sometimes competing subsystems. The sources bring in Michael Gazzaniga's famous split brain research to illustrate this.
The split brain experiments are absolutely mind-blowing. I had to read that section 3 times. Can you walk us through exactly what Gazzaniga did?
Certainly. In the mid-20th century, as a treatment for severe, debilitating epilepsy, surgeons would sometimes sever the corpus callosum.
That's the middle part, right?
Right. It's the thick bundle of nerve fibers that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Severing it prevented seizures from spreading across the entire brain.
They literally cut the brain in half.
Essentially, yes. The two hemispheres could no longer communicate directly. Gazzaniga began testing these patients, and the results were staggering.
What did he find?
Well, he would flash a word, let's say walk, exclusively to the patient's right visual field, which is processed by the left hemisphere. The patient would say they saw the word walk.
Because the left hemisphere controls language.
Correct. But then he would flash the word walk exclusively to the left visual field, which goes to the right hemisphere.
Okay.
The right hemisphere cannot speak. It has no language centers. So if you ask the patient, what did you see? Their left hemisphere, the one doing the talking, would say, I didn't see anything.
Because the left brain literally didn't see it and it couldn't ask the right brain.
Exactly. But here's the incredible part. Even though the patient verbally claimed to see nothing, their body would suddenly stand up and start walking.
Oh.
The right hemisphere saw the command and initiated the action without the left hemisphere's knowledge.
Which is wild on its own, but the truly crazy part is what happens next, right?
Yes. The researcher would then ask the patient, why did you just stand up and start walking? Now, the left hemisphere, the narrator, the ego, has a problem. Its body is doing something, and it has absolutely no idea why. It didn't see the command. It didn't make the decision.
So what does it say?
Instead of saying, I don't know, my body is acting on its own, the left hemisphere instantly invents a plausible story. The patient would say, oh, I was just going to get a Coke from the fridge.
It just lies. It fabricates a narrative on the spot to cover up the discontinuity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gazzaniga coined the concept of the interpreter module. It is a system in the left hemisphere that constantly observes our behaviors and emotions and constructs coherent post hoc narratives to explain them.
That's wild.
Its entire job is to preserve the feeling of a unified self, even when the self is doing completely contradictory things based on unconscious drives.
So we are quite literally a chorus, not a solo act. The ego is just the PR manager standing at the podium, spinning a narrative for a massive corporation of subsystems it barely understands.
That is a very apt analogy. The text also mentions Julian Jaynes' theories on the bicameral mind, which proposes that in ancient human history, consciousness actually involved one part of the brain generating auditory hallucinations, that the other part of the brain interpreted as the literal voice of the gods.
Which sounds crazy until you understand the split brain stuff.
Right. And it references modern clinical frameworks like internal family systems therapy, which models the human psyche as a complex system of parts or subpersonalities, protectors, managers, exiles that handle trauma and fear independently.
Okay, so bringing this all back to the question of the transcendent. Because we are a chorus of interacting systems, the deep unconscious parts of the mind can generate profound insights.
Yes.
But to communicate those insights to the conscious ego without causing a complete psychological breakdown, the brain has to package the transcendent into familiar, culturally intelligible symbols.
Precisely. If the raw, infinite, unwitnessed realization hit the ego directly, it would be traumatic. The ego would shatter. So the psyche builds an interface.
I love the computer interface analogy of the text here, but I want to expand on it. Think about the smartphone or the computer you are using right now.
Okay.
The actual internal processes of that machine are just incomprehensible strings of binary code, ones and zeros, microchips firing millions of times a second.
Pure data.
If you, the user, had to interact with the raw machine code to write an email or open a photograph, you would be completely paralyzed. You couldn't do it.
The complexity is too dense for practical engagement.
Right. So what did software engineers do? They built a GUI, a graphical user interface. They created the illusion of a desktop.
Right, yeah.
They made a little picture of a manila folder and a little picture of a trash can and an envelope icon for your mail. There is no actual physical folder inside your computer. It's an illusion.
But it's a functional illusion.
Exactly. It's a necessary functional illusion that allows you to interact with the terrifying complexity of the machine.
And the sources argue that religious imagery, myth, and visionary experiences function in the exact same way. They are the psychological GUI for the infinite.
Yes. So a Romanized Christ for a Roman civilization or white Jesus for a European civilization isn't just about political dominance. It's a cognitive adaptation.
It translates the data.
The brain takes the staggering, formless reality of kenosis, of divine love, of the unified cosmos, and renders it into a face that the culture recognizes. The sacred has to become an icon we can click on, or else our minds would just crash trying to process the raw content.
The symbolic form is translated into a structure that the specific user's psyche can tolerate and engage with emotionally. The text points out that human beings are neurologically tuned by evolution to respond to recognizable faces, narrative arcs, and familiar social hierarchies.
We need faces.
We do. A completely alien, abstract, formless, sacred figure would fail psychologically. The human brain couldn't integrate it into a moral framework. The visionary experience feels completely real to the mystic, and the underlying meaning is real to the psyche. But the rendering mechanism, the face the divine wears, is highly adaptive and culturally contingent.
And what's amazing is that the great mystical traditions have known this all along. This isn't just modern science debunking religion. This is modern science confirming what the deepest religious thinkers have always said.
Absolutely. It is a universal human cognitive structure recognized across the globe.
Have all pointed to this.
The sources draw from mystical traditions across the board to prove this. The Tao Te Ching opens its very first chapter by explicitly stating that the Tao that can be spoken or named is not the internal true Tao.
Right, words fail.
Jewish mysticism, particularly the Kabbalistic tradition, constantly emphasizes the hiddenness, the Ein Sof, the infinite formlessness of divine reality.
And the Christian mystics say the same.
Yes, the 14th century Christian text, The Cloud of Unknowing, says the exact same thing. You cannot think your way to God. You can only encounter the divine by abandoning your concepts.
The dashboard has to be turned off.
Exactly. They all agree that ultimate reality cannot be captured in literal descriptive language. The symbol, the icon, the dogma, these are just fingers pointing at the moon. They are not the moon itself.
We personify meaning because human cognition is inherently relationally structured. We just don't engage well with pure, cold abstractions.
No, we don't.
Like if you tell someone to love the structural interconnectedness of the cosmos, they will stare at you blankly. But if you tell them a story about a deity who suffers alongside them, their heart breaks open. We need faces. We need stories. We need the GUI.
Yes, we require embodied meaning. The sacred becomes human-shaped in our minds because human consciousness itself is socially and symbolically organized.
It's how we're built.
The image changes across centuries and across cultures because the interface naturally shifts to match the user's environment. But the underlying structure, the profound transformative encounter with ultimate meaning beyond the ego, remains consistent.
Man, this has been an absolutely massive journey today. For you listening, whether you are driving or cooking or just sitting quietly, let's just trace the immense arc of what we've unpacked.
It's a lot of ground.
We started by discovering that that constant nagging voice in your head is really just a biological dashboard. It's a survival interface, an evolutionary VR headset, not the ultimate engine of your reality.
Right.
From there, we realized that what modern pop culture calls higher consciousness is actually a trap if it just means inflating that ego and staring at the dashboard.
And we saw that true liberation, recognized historically as kenosis and neurologically as the quieting of the default mode network, involves stepping away from that false center.
Right. And when that center quiets down, the brain continues to deeply process profound insights. But because the ego, the internal PR manager, didn't witness their construction, those insights arrive feeling completely downloaded or foreign. They feel like revelation.
Which finally led us to understand that to survive those overwhelming, unwitnessed encounters with the transcendent, our brains automatically build familiar cultural interfaces.
The psychological GUI.
Yes. We generate psychological icons, faces, myths, and stories we recognize, so we can actually engage with the infinite without our cognitive software completely crashing.
It is a profoundly beautiful look at the architecture of human meaning. It makes me respect the brain so much more, and it honestly makes me take my own internal monologue so much less seriously.
It is a humbling body of research, to say the least.
It really is. And it leaves me with one final thought, something for you to mull over and explore on your own as you go about your week.
Oh.
Yeah. If our brains are biologically hardwired to translate overwhelming infinite reality into culturally familiar icons just so we can psychologically survive the experience, what happens to our psychological interfaces right now?
That's a good question.
I mean, as our modern culture becomes increasingly digital, heavily globalized, and totally detached from traditional physical communities, what will the interface for the transcendent look like for the next generation? When the familiar historical faces fade and the ancient myths lose their cultural resonance, what entirely new symbols will our minds construct to face the unknown?
That is a phenomenal and perhaps slightly unsettling question to sit with.
Until next time, keep questioning the narrator in your head. Maybe let the dashboard dim for a little while and see what the engine is really doing in the dark. See you next time on The Deep Dive.